My name is Jake Mitchell, and I wear two badges in our small county. During the day, I am Sheriff Mitchell, keeping the peace across our rural community. But in the early morning hours and late evenings, I am just Jake, a third-generation rancher continuing the legacy my grandfather started on this land 70 years ago. Our ranch sits on 200 acres of prime grazing land, with rolling hills that stretch toward the horizon and a creek that runs crystal clear through the back pasture. Every morning at 5:30, I walk out to feed the cattle and horses, breathing in the crisp air that smells of hay and earth and honest work. This land has been my family's life for 3 generations, and I plan to pass it on to my children someday. That peaceful life changed forever when the Meadowbrook HOA development went up on the property next to ours. Suddenly, our quiet country road filled with construction trucks and the sound of hammers. Within 6 months, 47 identical houses sprouted up like mushrooms after rain, each one painted the same shade of beige with the same small yards and the same white picket fences. Most of the new neighbors were decent folks who had moved out from the city looking for a quieter life. They waved when they drove past, and some even stopped to admire the horses grazing near the fence line. But Karen Henderson was different from the start. She moved into the house closest to our property line, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an attitude that could freeze water in July. The first time I met her, she was standing at her back fence taking pictures of my barn with her phone. "Excuse me," she called out when she saw me walking toward her. "Are you the owner of this operation?" I tipped my hat politely. "Yes, ma'am, Jake Mitchell. This is my family's ranch." Karen's nose wrinkled like she had smelled something terrible. "Well, Mr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you about some issues. The noise from your animals starts before 6 in the morning. The smell is quite strong when the wind blows this direction. And frankly, having all this farm equipment sitting around is bringing down our property values." I kept my voice calm and respectful. "Ma'am, this ranch has been here since 1954. We operate under agricultural exemptions that protect our right to farm. The animals make noise because they are animals, and the smell you mention is just part of ranch life." Her face flushed red. "I paid good money for my home, and I have rights too. You need to clean this up or move your operation somewhere else." "I understand your concerns," I said, "but this is a working ranch on agricultural land. We follow all the rules and regulations." Karen stepped closer to the fence, her voice rising. "Rules and regulations can change, Mr. Mitchell, and they will change. I can promise you that." She turned and stormed back toward her house, but not before raising her phone to take more pictures of my property. I watched her go, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Something about the way she said those words made me realize this was not going to be a simple neighbor dispute. That evening, I noticed Karen walking the fence line again, her phone constantly raised, recording everything from different angles. She took pictures of my tractor, my hay barn, the feeding areas, even the water troughs. It felt like being watched by someone building a case against you, and I suppose that is exactly what was happening. The next morning, I found her standing by my front gate at 5:45, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. "This noise ordinance violation needs to stop," she announced. "I am documenting everything for my HOA board." I rubbed my eyes, still waking up. "Ma'am, cattle need to be fed early. This is not a noise ordinance issue. This is agricultural activity on agricultural land." "We will see about that," she snapped, holding up her phone. "Things are going to change around here, Mr. Mitchell. Mark my words." As she walked away, I knew my peaceful ranch life was about to become a battlefield. Within a week, Karen had transformed from angry neighbor into a one-woman crusade against everything my ranch represented. Her first move was social media, and she played it like a master manipulator, pulling heartstrings and pushing buttons. She created a Facebook group called Meadowbrook Property Protection and filled it with dramatic photos of my ranch. Every picture came with captions designed to make my normal farming activities sound like environmental disasters. A photo of my cattle grazing became uncontrolled livestock creating health hazards. A picture of my hay storage turned into fire hazards threatening our community. Even my old red barn, built by my grandfather in 1954, was labeled as unsightly structures destroying neighborhood aesthetics. The post spread through the HOA development like wildfire. Karen had found her audience, and they were ready to be outraged. Comments poured in from neighbors I had never met, all agreeing that something needed to be done about the ranch situation. But Karen was not content with just social media warfare. She escalated to official HOA business, and that was when the violation notices started appearing on my property. The first one was zip-tied to my front gate on a Tuesday morning. It was an official Meadowbrook HOA violation, notice demanding I remove unsightly farm equipment from view within 30 days. The second notice arrived Friday, this time demanding I relocate my livestock to appropriate areas not visible from residential properties. I stared at these notices in disbelief. My property was not part of their HOA. My ranch predated their development by decades. But Karen either did not understand property law or simply did not care. The notices kept coming. Remove the barn. Eliminate animal odors. Install privacy fencing. Each demand more ridiculous than the last, as if a working ranch could somehow become invisible to appease suburban sensibilities. Karen organized her first neighborhood meeting specifically to discuss the ranch problem. The invitation, which I received through a neighbor, promised to address ongoing quality of life issues caused by commercial agricultural activities in our residential area. I decided to attend that meeting to defend my rights and explain the legal reality of the situation. Walking into that community center felt like entering hostile territory. 43 people packed into folding chairs, all of them staring at me like I was the villain in their suburban fairy tale. Karen stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation full of photos from my ranch. She had turned my way of life into a legal argument against rural existence itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone used to getting her way, "we have a serious problem that threatens everything we have invested in this community." She clicked through slide after slide, each photo accompanied by her editorial commentary about health risks, safety concerns, and declining property values. She made my cattle sound like wild beasts. She made my barn sound like a condemned building. She made my grandfather's legacy sound like a blight on the landscape. "This commercial operation," she continued, gesturing toward me, "has no place in our residential community. Mr. Mitchell needs to understand that times have changed, and his operation needs to change with them or relocate somewhere more appropriate." The crowd murmured their agreement. Someone in the back called out, "What can we do legally?" Karen smiled like she had been waiting for that exact question. "I am so glad you asked. We have options, and we have rights as homeowners and taxpayers." She spent the next 20 minutes outlining her plan to force me off my own land through legal pressure, bureaucratic complaints, and financial warfare. The applause that followed her presentation told me everything I needed to know about what I was facing. When they finally let me speak, I tried to explain property rights, agricultural exemptions, and the simple fact that my ranch existed long before their subdivision. But my voice of reason fell on deaf ears. They had already decided I was the problem, and Karen had given them the solution. I left that meeting knowing the real war was just beginning. Karen wasted no time turning her neighborhood support into a full-scale legal assault on my family's ranch. Within 2 weeks of that community meeting, the first official letter arrived in my mailbox, bearing the letterhead of Hartwell, Morrison and Associates, attorneys at law. The cease and desist letter was 3 pages of legal language demanding I immediately halt all commercial agricultural activities that were allegedly in violation of zoning regulations, noise ordinances, and environmental protection standards. It threatened civil action if I did not comply within 15 days. I read that letter 3 times, my anger building with each paragraph. Every word was carefully chosen to make my legitimate ranching activities sound illegal and dangerous. They were using legal intimidation to try to shut down an operation that had been completely lawful for 70 years. But the letter was just the beginning. Karen had apparently researched every government agency that might have any possible jurisdiction over my property, and she filed complaints with all of them. The county zoning office received reports about illegal commercial activity in residential areas. The health department got complaints about unsanitary livestock conditions creating public health risks. The Environmental Protection Agency was told about groundwater contamination from animal waste. Every single complaint was fabricated or exaggerated, but each one triggered an official response. Government inspectors started showing up at my ranch with clipboards and cameras, responding to Karen's endless stream of false reports. The irony was almost unbearable. My own sheriff's department began receiving anonymous calls about suspicious activity at my ranch. Deputies who worked for me were being sent to investigate their own boss based on lies told by a neighbor with a grudge. Deputy Martinez pulled into my driveway on a Thursday afternoon, looking embarrassed and frustrated. "Sheriff, I got another anonymous tip about illegal activity out here. I know it is garbage, but I have to follow protocol." I nodded and invited him to look around. "Do your job, Miguel. Document whatever you need to document." He spent 15 minutes taking photos and notes, both of us knowing the whole exercise was pointless. But Karen was forcing us to waste department resources responding to her fabricated emergencies. The harassment escalated when Karen started trespassing on my property to gather evidence for her legal campaign. I caught her on my land 3 times in 2 weeks, always with her phone or camera, always claiming she was documenting violations. The first time, she was measuring the distance between my barn and her fence line. When I confronted her, she insisted she had a right to verify property boundaries. The second time, she was photographing my hay storage area, claiming she needed evidence of fire hazards. The third time, I found her trying to photograph inside my animal shelters. "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property," I told her firmly. "You need to leave immediately." Karen looked me straight in the eye with no shame whatsoever. "I am collecting evidence of code violations that affect my property value. I have every right to document these conditions." "You have no right to be on my land without permission. This is your final warning." She smiled coldly and walked back to her own property, but not before taking a few more photos over her shoulder. The financial pressure started when Karen contacted my mortgage company, claiming my agricultural activities violated the terms of my loan agreement. She called my insurance provider with reports about unsafe conditions that supposedly voided my coverage. She even contacted the county tax assessor, questioning whether my agricultural exemptions were legitimate. None of these attacks worked, but each one required phone calls, paperwork, and stress to resolve. Karen was trying to exhaust me financially and emotionally, hoping I would give up and sell rather than continue fighting. The rumors she spread through town were the most damaging part of her campaign. She told people at the grocery store that I was running an illegal livestock operation. She claimed at the post office that my ranch was contaminating local water supplies. She spread stories at the bank about how my commercial activities were bringing down everyone's property values. These lies reached my ears through friends and colleagues who thought I should know what was being said about me. Each rumor felt like a knife in the back, watching my reputation in the community get attacked by someone who had been my neighbor for less than 3 months. The final escalation came when Karen blocked my ranch access road during cattle transport day. I had a truck coming to pick up 6 head of cattle for transport to the auction barn, a routine operation I had been doing for 20 years. But when the cattle truck arrived, Karen had parked her white BMW sideways across the road, completely blocking access to my property. She stood next to her car with her arms crossed, daring us to try to move her. "This road is not rated for heavy commercial vehicles," she announced to the truck driver. "You are creating safety hazards and damaging our infrastructure." I walked over to her car, my patience finally reaching its breaking point. "Karen, move your vehicle immediately. You are blocking legal access to my property." "I am protecting our community from illegal commercial activity," she replied, her voice loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. Standing there watching this woman block my cattle truck, I realized she had crossed every line of decency and legality. But I also knew that, as a law enforcement officer, I had to handle this situation carefully and professionally. What I did not know was that Karen was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Karen's harassment campaign reached a dangerous new level when she started interfering directly with my livestock and farm equipment. What had begun as complaints and legal threats escalated into actions that put animals at risk and crossed every line of rural decency. The first incident happened on a Tuesday evening when I found one of my pasture gates standing wide open. 23 head of cattle had wandered onto the county road, creating a dangerous situation that took 3 hours and 4 neighbors to resolve. The gate latch showed clear signs of tampering, and I found fresh footprints in the mud that matched the designer boots Karen always wore. When I confronted her the next morning, she denied everything with a straight face. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Maybe you should maintain your equipment better." But the evidence was clear. Someone had deliberately opened that gate, putting my animals and passing motorists at serious risk. This was no longer about property values or noise complaints. This was sabotage. Karen escalated her false reporting campaign to emergency services, making my life a constant stream of responding to fabricated crises. She called animal control every few days with reports of neglect and abuse, forcing them to send inspectors who found nothing wrong, but had to waste time and resources responding to her lies. "Sheriff, this is getting ridiculous," said Dr. Sarah Chen, the county veterinarian, after her 4th visit in 2 weeks. "Your animals are in excellent condition. These reports are completely false, but we have to investigate every complaint." I nodded grimly. "I know you are just doing your job, Doc. Document whatever you need to document." The most disturbing incident happened on a Friday night when I caught Karen on my property after midnight. I was checking on a horse that had seemed off at evening feeding when I saw a flashlight beam moving around my cattle pasture. I grabbed my own flashlight and quietly approached the intruder. Karen was crouched next to my water tank, trying to take photos of the automatic watering system. When my light hit her, she spun around like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you doing on my property at midnight?" I demanded. Karen straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her composure. "I am documenting water system violations that could contaminate our groundwater." "You are trespassing on private property in the middle of the night. That is a criminal offense." "I am collecting evidence of environmental violations," she replied, holding up her phone. "These unsanitary conditions affect the entire community." I watched her walk back toward her property, realizing that Karen's obsession with destroying my ranch had reached a level that was honestly frightening. Normal people do not sneak around other people's property at midnight taking pictures of water tanks. Karen's complaints to the fire department about my hay storage demonstrated how completely disconnected she had become from rural reality. She called them twice in 1 week, reporting hazardous materials and fire dangers because I had normal hay and feed supplies stored in my barn. Fire Chief Williams pulled me aside after the second false alarm. "Jake, I have known you for 15 years. Your operation is cleaner and safer than most, but this woman keeps calling us about imaginary fire hazards." "I know, Tom. She is trying to use every agency against me." "Well, false reports to emergency services are a crime. You might want to start documenting these incidents." The breaking point came during a heated confrontation at our shared property line on a sweltering Thursday afternoon. I was repairing fence posts when Karen marched over, her face red with anger and determination. "This ends today," she announced, pointing her finger at my chest. "I am done playing games with you." "I am not playing games, Karen. I am running a legitimate ranch on my own property." "Your so-called ranch is destroying everything we have worked for. You are selfish and stubborn, and you refuse to be reasonable." My patience, worn thin by months of harassment, finally snapped. "Reasonable? You want to talk about reasonable? You have been harassing me for months, filing false reports, trespassing on my property, and now you are interfering with my livestock. That is not reasonable, Karen. That is criminal." Her eyes blazed with fury. "How dare you talk to me like that? You are nothing but a hillbilly farmer who thinks he owns this whole county." "I own my property and I have rights, whether you like it or not." "We will see about that," she snarled, pulling out her phone. "We will just see about that." Karen dialed 911 right there in front of me, her voice suddenly switching to the trembling tone of a frightened victim. 911. "I need police immediately. My neighbor is threatening me and I fear for my safety. He is being aggressive and hostile and I think he might hurt me. Please send officers right away to arrest him for harassment and threatening behavior." She gave the dispatcher our address and hung up, smiling with cold satisfaction. "Now we will see who has rights around here," she said, crossing her arms. "The police are coming to arrest you for harassment and threats." I stared at her in disbelief. After months of her harassment, false reports, and illegal trespassing, she was calling 911 to have me arrested. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. What Karen did not know was that she had just made the phone call that would end her reign of terror forever. The police radio on my belt crackled to life while I stood in my own pasture, still staring at Karen in disbelief. The familiar voice of dispatch filled the air between us, and what I heard made the whole situation even more surreal. "All units, we have a domestic disturbance call on Meadowbrook Road. Caller reports harassment and threats from a neighbor, requesting immediate response for possible arrest. Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph as she heard the radio transmission. She had no idea that the little black radio on my belt was receiving the same call she had just made. The irony of the moment was almost too much to process. I looked down at my work clothes, dusty jeans and a faded shirt, then at the sheriff's badge clipped to my belt next to the radio. My patrol car sat in the driveway of my own house, where I had parked it after my shift ended 3 hours earlier. The decision I had to make was unlike anything I had faced in 20 years of law enforcement. I could call in another deputy to handle the call, explaining the conflict of interest, or I could respond professionally to a 911 call about myself, knowing that my integrity and Karen's lies were about to collide in spectacular fashion. I made my choice. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Mitchell. I am in the immediate area and will respond to the Meadowbrook Road call. Karen was still smiling when I keyed the radio, but her expression started to shift as she processed what she had just heard. She looked at the radio on my belt, then at my face, then back at the radio. I could see the gears turning in her head, but she had not yet connected all the dots. I will be right back, I told her calmly. Do not go anywhere. I walked to my patrol car and took a moment to compose myself. Everything about this situation was unprecedented, but I knew I had to handle it with complete professionalism. I was about to respond to a 911 call made by someone who had been harassing me for months, and every action I took would be scrutinized. I started the patrol car and drove the 50 yards from my driveway to where Karen stood waiting by the property line. When I stepped out of that official sheriff's vehicle in full uniform with my badge clearly visible, the recognition hit Karen like a lightning bolt. Her mouth fell open. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face as she stared at the sheriff's uniform, the badge, the patrol car, and finally my face. For several seconds she could not speak. "Good afternoon, ma'am," I said in my most professional voice. "I am Sheriff Mitchell, responding to a 911 call about harassment and threats. Are you the person who called for police assistance?" Karen's voice came out as a whisper. You are the sheriff." "Yes, ma'am. I am the county sheriff, and you called 911 requesting my arrest for harassment and threatening behavior." The reality crashed down on her like a collapsing building. Every false report she had filed, every anonymous call to my department, every demand that police arrest me, all of it had been directed at the county sheriff himself. Karen started backpedaling immediately, her confident victim act dissolving into panic. "There has been some kind of misunderstanding. I did not know. I never meant." "Ma'am, let me be clear about what has happened here. You called 911 and reported that your neighbor was threatening you and needed to be arrested. That neighbor is me. I am the sheriff of this county." She was shaking now, the full implications of her months-long harassment campaign hitting her all at once. "I can explain everything. This is all just a big mistake." I pulled out my notebook and began documenting the incident with the same professionalism I brought to every call. "Ma'am, filing false police reports is a serious crime. Making fraudulent 911 calls is a felony. I need to ask you some questions about the report you just made." "I want to withdraw the complaint," she said quickly. "I do not want to press charges. This was all a misunderstanding." "Ma'am, you cannot simply withdraw a 911 call. When you dial emergency services and request police response for a criminal matter, that triggers a legal process." Karen's panic was escalating as she realized how completely her plan had backfired. The woman who had spent months trying to destroy me through false reports and legal harassment was now facing the consequences of her actions. But this was just the beginning. I had months of documentation about her harassment campaign, her trespassing, her false reports to multiple agencies, and her interference with my livestock. Karen had no idea that every incident she thought she was getting away with had been carefully recorded by someone who understood the legal system better than she ever would. The tables had turned completely, and Karen was about to learn that actions have consequences. I opened my patrol car's laptop and began accessing the files I had been carefully maintaining throughout Karen's months-long harassment campaign. Every false report, every trespassing incident, every threatening interaction had been documented with the thoroughness of someone who understood that evidence matters in court. Ma'am, before we discuss today's 911 call, I need to address several ongoing issues, I said, pulling up the first file. Over the past 4 months, my department has received dozens of anonymous reports about suspicious activity at my ranch. Would you know anything about those calls? Karen's face went pale. I do not know what you're talking about. We also have multiple reports filed with county zoning, the health department, environmental protection, and animal control. All of these reports were about my property, and all of them were determined to be false or exaggerated. She started wringing her hands. Those were legitimate concerns about code violations. I pulled up photos on my laptop screen. Ma'am, I have security cameras on my property. These images show you trespassing on my land on 17 different occasions over the past 3 months. Karen stared at the photos in shock. Clear images of her sneaking around my property, taking pictures, measuring fence lines, and even trying to open animal gates. Her face appeared clearly in every frame, along with timestamps that correlated with my incident reports. "Those are not what they look like," she stammered. "I was just checking property boundaries." "Ma'am, crossing onto someone else's property without permission is criminal trespassing. Doing it 17 times shows a pattern of criminal behavior." I turned the laptop screen toward her. "This particular image shows you attempting to open a cattle gate at 11:37 p.m. on October 15th. That same night, 23 head of cattle escaped onto the county road, creating a dangerous situation that required emergency response." Karen's voice became desperate. "I was not trying to let your animals out. I was just documenting unsafe conditions." "Ma'am, tampering with livestock facilities is a felony in this state. It endangers animals and creates public safety hazards." I pulled up another file. "Your social media posts have been quite interesting as well. Screenshots of your Facebook group show you organizing a campaign to force me off my property through legal harassment and financial pressure." The evidence was overwhelming, and Karen knew it. Her own posts, photos, and recorded statements at HOA meetings provided a clear record of malicious intent. Every move she had made to destroy me was now evidence of her own criminal behavior. "I also have records of your contacts with my mortgage company, insurance provider, and various government agencies," I continued. "Knowingly filing false reports with government agencies is a crime. Attempting to interfere with someone's financial relationships through false statements could constitute fraud." Karen tried a different approach, switching from denial to bargaining. "Sheriff, I think we can work this out. I made some mistakes, but I was just trying to protect my property values. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement." "Ma'am, you called 911 47 minutes ago and reported that I was threatening you and needed to be arrested. That call was recorded. Would you like to hear the recording? I played the audio from my laptop. Karen's voice filled the air, dramatic and panicked, claiming she feared for her safety and demanding my immediate arrest for harassment and threatening behavior. That recording will be evidence in your criminal trial, I explained. Making false statements to 911 dispatchers is a felony. Abuse of emergency services carries serious penalties. Karen's demeanor completely collapsed as she realized the legal trap she had built for herself. Please, Sheriff, I was upset and confused. I did not mean any of this to go so far. Ma'am, criminal intent is not measured by what you meant to happen. It is measured by what you actually did. And what you did was conduct a months-long campaign of harassment, trespassing, filing false reports, and making fraudulent emergency calls. I closed the laptop and reached for my handcuffs. Karen Henderson, you are under arrest for filing false police reports, making fraudulent 911 calls, criminal trespassing, harassment, and abuse of emergency services. No, please, she cried out. This cannot be happening. I am the victim here. Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire property. Karen's knees buckled, and I had to steady her to keep her from falling. This is impossible, she whispered. You cannot arrest me. I am the one who called for help. Ma'am, you called 911 and made false statements about criminal activity. That is a crime, regardless of who you called it on. By this time, neighbors from the HOA development had gathered along the fence line, drawn by the sight of a sheriff's patrol car and the sound of Karen's protests. The same people who had supported her campaign against my ranch now watched in stunned silence as their champion was arrested. You have the right to remain silent, I began, reciting the Miranda warning I had given thousands of times. But this time felt different, knowing that every word was being heard by the woman who had tried to destroy my family's legacy through lies and harassment. Karen was crying now, the full weight of her situation finally sinking in. My neighbors will never forgive me for this. As I guided her toward the patrol car, I looked at the crowd of HOA residents watching from their perfectly manicured yards. Their expressions showed a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and dawning realization that they had been supporting someone whose actions were not just wrong, but criminal. The patrol car door closed with a final click, marking the end of Karen's harassment campaign and the beginning of her journey through the legal system she had tried to weaponize against me. The courthouse steps felt different 6 months later as I watched Karen Henderson walk out in handcuffs for the final time. The judge had just sentenced her to 90 days in county jail, 2 years of probation, and community service at the county animal shelter. The irony of that last detail was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. The charges had stacked up like building blocks of justice. 3 counts of filing false police reports, 2 counts of making fraudulent 911 calls, 17 counts of criminal trespassing, 1 count of criminal mischief for tampering with my livestock gate, multiple counts of harassment and abuse of emergency services. Her own evidence had convicted her. The social media posts she created to attack me became proof of malicious intent. The HOA meeting recordings she made to build support for her campaign became evidence of organized harassment. The photos she took while trespassing became documentation of her criminal activity. The HOA development underwent a complete transformation after Karen's arrest made local news. The story spread through social media faster than her original harassment campaign. But this time the narrative was about consequences and justice rather than manufactured outrage. The news coverage turned Karen from crusading victim into cautionary tale. Local woman arrested for harassing county sheriff became a story that people shared as a warning about entitled behavior and false accusations. The reporter who covered the trial noted the irony of someone calling 911 on the very person who would respond to their emergency. The financial consequences were severe. Karen faced restitution for the cost of all the false emergency calls and government inspections her lies had triggered. Her legal fees mounted as she hired and fired 3 different attorneys trying to find someone who could make her victimization narrative stick in court. The Meadowbrook HOA residents distanced themselves from Karen's actions immediately after her arrest. The board issued a formal apology for the harassment I had endured and clarified that my ranch was not subject to their authority. Several neighbors stopped by to apologize personally and express their respect for how professionally I had handled the situation. My ranch operations returned to their peaceful routine, but now with additional security measures and complete documentation of all activities. The incident had taught me valuable lessons about protecting yourself when dealing with people who will weaponize any system against you. The story became a local legend that people still talk about years later. It serves as a reminder that rural communities value honesty, respect, and understanding your place in the broader community. Karen had moved to the country but tried to make the country conform to her suburban expectations, and that approach had predictable consequences. The deeper lesson was about the importance of patience, professionalism, and truth. I could have escalated the conflict at many points, but maintaining my integrity and documenting everything properly had been the key to justice. Karen's harassment had been designed to exhaust me into giving up, but instead it had exhausted her resources and reputation while strengthening my position in the community. Truth and patience had triumphed over lies and aggression. My ranch continues to operate peacefully, and my family's legacy remains secure for future generations. Sometimes justice takes time, but it usually finds a way to prevail when good people stand up for what is right and refuse to be bullied off their own land. The best revenge, it turns out, is simply living well and letting the truth speak for itself.